So I started this company because I wanted to drink DDW, and it didn't exist in the US, and I couldn't get any. And I really wanted to drink deuterium-depleted water, have that water be my water that I drink daily, because I researched the science and it made a lot of sense to me. And this is the research I'm going to share with you. So this is our production facility. And to make our deuterium-depleted water is a difficult process because we don't do a standard filtration on water, which is where you take contaminants out of water. What we remove from water is another type of water, which gets very difficult and requires massive equipment like this. And the reason I wanted to drink deuterium-depleted water, because I wanted healthy mitochondria. I wanted healthy mitochondria then, I want my healthy mitochondria now, and I want my mitochondria to be healthy my entire life. And what I mean by healthy, I mean large numbers of them, because they are the engines that produce energy in our bodies. The more we have and the healthier they are, the more energy we have, the faster we can repair. So light water is what's known as 10 parts per million of deuterium. And it's the only water in the world, I believe, that has achieved that. There's a few other companies in the world that also do deuterium-depleted water. Not many companies are doing this because it's a very difficult process, and you really have to understand all the subtleties that go along with that, physics and engineering, etc. So we're going to explain what deuterium is. I know you guys have been patient. Thank you so much. So deuterium is a form of hydrogen, and we know periodic table, very simple. Hydrogen is the first element in nature, and deuterium is a version of hydrogen that was discovered in the 20th century. Up until then, we thought that every element was singular in its constituency, but it turns out there's something called isotopes, where every element has a version of itself based on the number of neutrons in there. So you have a protium and a deuterium. So protium is the hydrogen that takes up the entire universe. This protium is the hydrogen that our bodies run on. Protium is the hydrogen that fuels stars and so forth. Deuterium is a version of hydrogen that has an extra neutron. You can see the P stands for proton, the N for neutron. So most of the hydrogen in the world is protium, and of 0.01%, a little bit more than that actually, is deuterium. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but I'm going to explain why it is. So here you see that 0.01% of all hydrogen in the universe is this heavier form. And the lighter form, which is the first element on the periodic table, hydrogen, is the most abundant thing in the universe, most abundant element in the universe. Still 75% of the universe is hydrogen. So hydrogen, as we know, binds with oxygen to create water. And we're a water planet. And unfortunately, very little of the water on this planet is actually water that we can consume. It's potable water for us. And even less of that water is water that is free of contaminants. So the contaminant of deuterium is this very small amount of the total water that exists, and yet it plays a really big part in our health and longevity. So a liter of water has about 20,000 drops. Little drop, drop, drop. So 20,000 drops. In 1 liter, 20,000 of those drops is what we think is H2O. But 6 of them is not H2O. 6 of them is HDO. And so that 1 right there, replace that with a 2. And so this is what we want to bind with oxygen to create water, and this is what happens. So when you have that, you don't get H2O anymore, you get HDO, or if both hydrogens are replaced by deuterium, you get D2O, which is known as heavy water, which is used in all kinds of atomic processes, medicine, etc. So most of the world's drinking water is 150 parts per million. Like if you go to the tap or get to your filter here in Miami, you're going to get 150 parts per million of deuterium in your water. So deuterium, it's just heavier. You know, if you look at it simply, you just see that it's heavier than regular hydrogen. So that means that water becomes heavier, and that's why it's called heavy water. So 1 out of every 3,300 molecules is heavy water, is this HDO configuration. See? So that translates to about 150 parts per million. And the rest, 99.95%, almost 99.6% is regular water. So why is this such a big problem? Well, one thing is we know that we're about 75 to 80% water, but in fact, by molecular weight, we're actually 98.73% water. So we're almost like 99% water. We are water beings. We have an ocean within, and we have to take care of that ocean. So how did this deuterium problem occur? You know, as above, so below, as within, so without. So what happened that we have this contaminant in water? Well, it goes from the beginning of the universe. It basically cooled too quickly, so when hydrogen was converting to the next element, it got stuck, and there it's been since the beginning of time. So very simple, proton. This is what happened. It was going to become helium, but it didn't make it, so it got stuck. It got stuck between an element, so it doesn't know what it is, so it creates problems. And you have the 3 types of water because of this deuterium problem. You have the regular H2O, which is what our bodies run on, and then you have HDO, which is the contaminant we remove, and you have D2O, which is the same contaminant, there's just a lot less of it. And you may know, like I said, D2O from chemistry class or physics class, or this is heavy water used in nuclear reactors and other things. But so HDO and D2O is what we remove from water. So quick facts to consider. The water inside our cells, you may not know this, but water inside our cells is not water that we drink. It's water that our bodies make. It's called metabolic water, and it's made from the food that we eat primarily. So we actually recycle a lot of water in our bodies. People don't realize that even though 20 to 30% of the water that we have in our bodies gets recycled every day, and 70% you have to hydrate constantly. What we don't realize is that in the water that gets recycled, we're talking about 1,500, that's 1,500 gallons of water is constantly going through different reactions in your body and being recycled. So that means over a 75-year lifetime, that's 52 million gallons that have been recycled in your body constantly. So it's very busy on the inside. So we have this burden of deuterium in our bodies. It's about 1.1 grams on average for everybody. It can be a little less, can be a little more. And this creates problems biologically. I'm going to show you what problems it creates. But first I'm going to give you a little history of where this comes from. This is kind of exciting because it's so new. And you know, a lot of things, we look at ancient knowledge for wisdom. But in this case, we're actually breaking new ground. We're actually making paradigm shifts in awareness and science, longevity, and health. So deuterium was discovered in the early 30s, and then 75 years later, a phenomenal researcher, doctor, discovered something very profound about how it damages our cells' ability to produce energy. So go back almost 100 years. This is when deuterium was discovered in the early 30s, right around the time of Alice in Wonderland and FDR and the Nazis taking power. So it was an interesting time in modern history. But what happened, that ushered in the atomic age, because once they discovered that second isotope of hydrogen, it opened up a whole new world of physics. So in the 20th century, they really worked on what you can do with heavy water. You can make atomic bombs, you can make nuclear reactors, etc. And I think this century, we're going to really embrace the opposite of heavy water, which is light water, and what that can do for us biologically. So in the 20th century, the discovery of isotopes of hydrogen fueled our industry. And in the 21st century, what's going to fuel our biological coming back to base is awareness of the water that we should be drinking. Because the water we should be drinking, this is what I discovered 20 years ago, is the water that's closest to the water that we make metabolically. That makes the most amount of sense. And so I've been on this since. So there's a good representation of what, again, just to drill it into you so you guys can remember. That's the hydrogen we want, and that's the hydrogen we don't want. This creates all kinds of biological problems. And this one's actually radioactive, the tritium one. So in the beginning, when they first discovered this, they realized quickly that if you give heavy water to a plant or animal, it just doesn't germinate, doesn't sprout, if it's pure heavy water. So they started looking at this and saying, okay, we just synthesized this heavy water, this D2O in the lab. It looks like water, it tastes like water, but yet it kills you if you drink it. Why? So they started doing some research and understanding what the heck happened with water. You know, they both look like water. In fact, if you wanted to really hurt somebody, you'd give them a glass of heavy water. So they discovered back then. This is in the 30s and 40s and early 50s that heavy water was just not biologically compatible. So these are just old, very early research into this. So around that same time, they started looking, okay, well, if we just created heavy water in the lab, and we know that a little bit of heavy water isn't all water on the planet, is it the same all around the planet? And actually it's not. Some places have less heavy water than others. And this is what fueled this whole inquiry into, you know, how does this affect humans, okay? So then in the late 50s, they started researching how this light water, or deuterium-depleted water that occurs naturally, maybe 15 to 20% less deuterium than everywhere else, how does this affect the local populations? And sure enough, they had longer lifespan, less disease, you know, you go on and on and on. 6 to 7 times more centenarians, people that made it over 100 years old, in that particular area where there was lighter water than everywhere else that they measured. So they also did some census and found out that there were some people, I don't know if you want to believe it, but there's some people that lived to, what was this, 1,789 centenarians. Some guy reached 160 years. So these are in all these areas, mountain areas, that have naturally less deuterium in their water. And these are the people that they live in this like kind of harsh environment, but they're very healthy. And so in 1960, they published this, 1961 actually, they published this book. The research was done 58 to 60, and it was the first time they published in history that we know a study showing that the amount of deuterium in your water affects your state of health. And this was a huge breakthrough. And then later, J.F. Thompson published again in the United States. Other things were done, other publications in the 60s. A lot of research was done into this. And in this particular book, Biological Effects of Deuterium, it was concluded that it is incompatible with survival. But then again, these are a bunch of scientists, and that kind of information doesn't really get passed out into the general mainstream awareness. So this kind of was known about, but not known about, right? It's just, how many people know the word deuterium? Very few. How many people even go to these seminars or lectures? But I'm just showing you that there's like 80 years of background to this. So anyway, he discovered that, or he decided based on observation and research that it was incompatible with human life, deuterium. And sure enough, if you, like I said, if you give deuterium even 35% deuterium, or in this case 38.5% deuterium-enriched water, which luckily does not exist in nature, you have to make that in a lab. But if you give that to a mammal, or anything for that matter, you give it to any eukaryotic cell or anything, but in this case, mice, on day 5 they died. End of story. So why is this metabolically incompatible? Because it's still a type of water, right? We think all water is good, but it's not true. So 75 years after the discovery, and the guy won the Nobel Prize, Dr. Urey, for discovering this deuterium. 75 years later, Dr. Abdullah Olgun, he's a doctor, he's a dean of a medical university, very, very learned guy, amazing researcher. So in 2007, he published this paper. And he explained exactly how deuterium damages the mitochondria. It's irrefutable because it's a mechanical problem that we have. So, and that mechanical problem is, so these are protons, okay? And this thing that's got a red one next to it, that's a deuteron. Remember, it's twice the size of a regular hydrogen. It's twice the mass. So these motors, these motors are called ATP synthase motors. They produce the energy, the ATP energy in our bodies that allows us to breathe and live and speak and see. So they use protons. But every time a deuteron gets in there, it damages this motor. So why did Dr. Olgun even start looking at this? This was my question to him. I said, what, you know, you're a doctor with so many various research interests. What made you look into deuterium? And he said he wanted to see how much deuterium there was in the human body. Because when you look at it in water, it doesn't seem like it's a big deal, right? A few drops in a sea of millions, right? 20,000 drops, 6 drops of it is H2O. What's the big deal? So he looked at the blood, and he saw that there was 6 or more times more deuterium in our blood than the basic constituents of life. You know, our minerals, magnesium, potassium, glucose, all the things, all the molecules we need to survive and thrive. So this really piqued his curiosity and interest. So then he spent the next 2 years doing mathematical modeling to figure out how this deuterium damages us. And the first thing he looked at is all the reactions of water in the body. And it turns out there are thousands, if not tens of thousands of reactions. Remember I was saying earlier we recycle 1,500 gallons of water daily? This is because of all these reactions that happen in our bodies that use H2O. By the way, they prefer H2O. They don't want to use HDO, and this is the problem. When that gets into the reaction, that's when problems occur. So we think it's 6 drops of heavy water in every liter of, and it's a big deal, unfortunately, because it kills these guys. And these guys are the reason we're alive. So can anybody finish this little couplet for me? Roses are red, I wish you well. Anybody? Roses are red, I wish you well. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. We have 100,000 trillion, 100,000 trillion, not a number I can imagine, of mitochondria in our bodies. And each cell has 2,000 to 30,000 mitochondria. And each of those mitochondria has 320,000 of these nanomotors. And these nanomotors, if you zoom in, basically that's what I'm doing here, is I'm zooming in into the cell here. You know, this is the mitochondria, that's the nucleus, obviously. And so this is the complex reaction that's, this complex reaction, believe it or not, is actually trying to limit deuterium from our electron transport chain where energy is made. So there's the ATP synthase nanomotors, there's the ATP and ADP, it's basically made in the cell by these motors. And that's kind of a simplified illustration of what they look like. Unfortunately, this is a PDF. In my normal presentation, this thing moves and spins. So it shows you that every second you have 500 of these protons that go through the motor. So if you replace one of those protons, and it happens about every 15 seconds, one of those protons is replaced by a deuteron. Remember, it's twice the size. It doesn't fit in that thing. It causes it to stutter and causes it to torque and shear, and then problems occur. So 1 out of every 6,600 atoms of hydrogen is deuterium. This is the problem. So in 1990, the year I graduated high school, they discovered that for the first time, I think, in history, modern history, or any history, that the deuteron does not work like the proton. It does not go through the electron transport chain or that ATP synthase motor. It just doesn't produce any energy. In fact, it takes energy because it damages. This is I think Dr. Olgun will eventually win a Nobel Prize for this. At least I hope, because this is one of the greatest biological discoveries of our time. So he shows mechanically the actual stutter and shaking and the torquing of these motors. It's happening all the time, nonstop. The analogy I like to use is that if you wake up in the morning and you kiss your significant other and they kiss you back and everything is peachy and hunky-dory and wonderful, and you do that every day because you're in love. But then once in a while you get an elbow to the face and a knee to the groin. And that happens over and over and over again to our ATP synthase nanomotors. It grinds our gears down. And this is a reason why we age. I don't know if it's the only reason. I'm sure there's a lot more, but this is a very crucial bit of information in understanding human health and longevity and repair, is to limit this deuterium from our energy production pathways. So this is a phenomenal piece of machinery that we use to make the energy in our body. In fact, if you have a little bit of this ATP synthase, these little motors, if you have like a little bit in your hand, now these are nano, you can't even see them, and you can't even see them with the naked eye, or very difficult to even see with a microscope. But if you were to have just a little bit in your hand, like a quarter teaspoon, it would produce the same amount of power as a race car, as like a Indy, like 1,500 horsepower. This is what's happening in our cells. Okay? This is a phenomenal machine that we are. So here we go. This is a deuteron, this is a proton. You can see mechanically, if this doesn't have a space for this, it just doesn't fit. It creates all kinds of problems, non-stop. From the moment we are born to the time we die, we have this deuterium interference problem. We have this burden that we keep taking in more deuterium daily. And so when I found out about this science, I found out that there's something you can do about it. And that's, so as we know, as these get damaged, this is the root cause of all kinds of disease, okay? And this is the problem, again, that extra neutron, we don't want it. We want it out. Unfortunately, oxygen is not very smart, so it binds with whatever hydrogen it can. So that's why we have this hydrogen, this deuterium locked up in water, where it creates the most amount of problem in the electron transport chain. So what happens when you have too much damage in your mitochondria? What happens when you have too much proton leakage? Because that's what happens when that motor starts stuttering. It causes the membrane to weaken. When that membrane weakens, eventually protons take other paths. There are leaks in the chain. So when there's leaks, you have an equalization of energy, and then you have no energy in the system. And then basically when you have no membrane holding things together, that's it. So we want to keep the integrity of our cellular membranes, and we do that by making sure that our ATP synthase nanomotors and our mitochondria are healthy, and we do that by limiting deuterium into those nano-confined spaces. And this is exactly what our body is trying to do all the time in the electron transport chain. It's trying to limit deuterium from those places that energy is made. And we know this because when you take that mitochondrial water, that metabolic water I told you about that our bodies make, it's 60 to 70% lower in deuterium. So our bodies want this stuff out of we want this stuff out. So the water we drink is hurting us. So what do we want to do? We want to limit the amount of deuterium in our body. It's not only the water, it's also the food. Okay, everything has deuterium in it. And I'm gonna go a little deeper into more than we're gonna zoom in we're going to zoom in deeper than the mitochondria. We're going to zoom in deeper than the DNA, and we're going to go to the quantum aspects of this. Now, there's something known as quantum tunneling, okay? And this is a good explanation of quantum tunneling, but I don't think anybody understands what this means. So I'll give you the simple explanation of what quantum tunneling is. Because when you hear the word quantum, it's almost such a bankrupt word because we don't know the definition of it. So I'm going to provide you a definition so you know what quantum means. Quantum tunneling is when a particle can exist, or anything can exist in two places at once. So I don't know if you knew this, but in order for us to be alive, or in order for anything that lives and breathes to be here, we break the law of physics. We break the laws of classical physics to exist. And we have no scientific explanation for why. You just have to accept it. And this is because of quantum tunneling. Quantum tunneling is when you have, in this case, a hydrogen, which is represented by this genie here, and it wants to get to this side over here. Now, normally it has to climb a hill, or it has to go through an energy barrier, okay? When it comes to hydrogen, it doesn't do that. It shows up in the other place. So it basically bilocates, and then like a genie, disappears in one place, appears in the other. So that's incredible, because it breaks all classical laws of physics. It doesn't have to tunnel through that mountain. It disappears on one side and reappears on the other. And everything is doing that in our biology nonstop. Our lives are based on magic, because the physics that we accept and we believe is broken by our own need to exist. So quantum tunneling is that explanation. So in quantum tunneling, again, what's happening is that you're basically teleporting. So hydrogen teleports. Why? Well, it moves too fast. We can't stop it and ask. We just know this is a phenomenon that happens in the universe. So you have this quantum tunneling. And deuterium, being a part of hydrogen, or a type of hydrogen, still quantum tunnels. By the way, hydrogen is the last and only element that quantum tunnels. Everything else is just way too big. And subatomic particles quantum tunnel as well. But deuterium does not quantum tunnel the same way as hydrogen. So it slows everything down. And that's a kinetic problem. And that's illustrated here by the kinetic isotope effect. If you have a hydrogen bound to a carbon, or you have a deuterium bound to a carbon, the difference in dissociation is going to be 9 times. That deuterium is going to dissociate 9 times slower. So kinetically, metabolically, it slows us down. It slows down all reactions. Simply because it's just too big, it doesn't quantum tunnel, the same as hydrogen. So it's incompatible with our biology. It's just bigger, that's all. Bigger, heavier, slower. And so it's also harder to break a deuterium bond than a hydrogen bond. So it slows down all kinds of reactions. And when you start looking at the DNA and those reactions, when you're looking at real upstream foundational things, if there's sand that gets into the motor there, it's going to create all kinds of problems moving forward. So deuterium, the analogy I make is that you train for the marathon, you're ready for it, you're in best shape of your life, you got brand new shoes, you just bought the best running shoes that exist, you're ready to go to that race, and your first step out of the gate, you step in this big wad of gum, and it follows you for the next 26 miles. That's what deuterium is. So remember our beautiful mitochondria here, and inside there is the electron transport chain, and like I said, each one of these has 320,000 ATP synthase nanomotors that are constantly being damaged by deuterium. So if we look at where we have the most mitochondria in the human body, some people think it's the heart. It's not true. Actually, it's the eyes, the windows to the soul. Also, windows into our health. Because the best way that I've found, I'm always looking for ways to measure our health and performance, and trying to do this in a low-cost, low-impact, non-invasive type of way. And I discovered that one of the best ways to test your mitochondrial health is your reaction time. Because reaction time uses the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system together. And the eye has the most mitochondria that exist anywhere in the body. So reaction time is going to tell you how healthy your mitochondria is. And my reaction time, I've been drinking DDW now for 4.5 years. My reaction time is pretty quick. That's not me boasting, that's my mitochondria. Incidentally, 308 milliseconds is a pretty quick reaction time. A house cat's reaction time is like 50 milliseconds. So, anyway, this isn't new. This is a study from 1955 that already tells us this. It's like decades ago. They already told us. So deuterium may be the most overlooked marker in human biology, and it may be the most overlooked biological toxin or poison, even though it's natural and with us forever from the beginning of time. But our bodies have developed a strategy for managing it. But because of our modern lifestyle, modern diet, just all kinds of things, we get quickly overrun by this. So it's the Trojan horse. Deuterium is that Trojan horse of human potential. I wanted to tell you about my friend's book here. He has a company like ours. They also make DDW, one of the few companies. And his research was on cancer. And what he found was really, really profound. And what he discovered that when your ratio of deuterium to hydrogen goes down, your oncogenes go down too. Basically, if we have some genes that that basically make us more susceptible to cancer or that kind of neoplastic condition, maybe it's genetic. Well, when you lower the ratio, when you lower the deuterium in your body, you lower the risk of ever developing that, which is the reason why we're banned on Wikipedia. And so when you look at the DNA, now we went to the mitochondria, we zoomed in far deeper into what's happening at the quantum level, and then we go back up a little bit to the DNA. It's very simple. DNA is a double helix. And what is on the backbone of all DNA? Well, it's hydrogen. What's holding it all together? Hydrogen. So you have one deuteron for every 300 base pairs. And what if you have 2? What if you have 3? What does that do? Well, we learned that deuterium is twice the size, twice the mass of hydrogen. So if you have deuterium on that perfect DNA double helix that has to have a certain geometry in order to replicate, if you have something that taking the place of a hydrogen, a deuterium, something heavier, it causes that DNA to distort. And the more of this you have, the more distortion you have. And then you have errors in replication of that DNA. And remember, we're just a copy of a copy of a copy. Just how good is that copy every time? So the less mutation and the less transcription, less errors when your DNA unfolds and then snips and then reproduces, in that moment, if you have deuterium, it's going to distort the shape of it, and then you're going to have a bad translation, a bad copy, like Xerox with low toner. So we know that as DNA errors accumulate, we're more susceptible to cancer. The good news is that a lot of research, here's one paper in particular, showed that the opposite happens when you drink light water or deuterium-depleted water. Deuterium basically slows down repair, so more problems can occur. And so when you reduce deuterium, you actually repair at the right rate. So another helix in our bodies is collagen. Collagen, unlike DNA, is not a double helix, it's a triple helix. And collagen is responsible for a lot of things internally and, of course, externally. The quality of our skin is completely dependent on the quality of the collagen and elastin in our body. And the integrity of that collagen is dependent on the triple helix spiral and how well it's maintained. Like you can see here, if something's braided very nice, it's going to have it's going to look very pleasing and beautiful. And then if you have breaks or tears, in nature there's this thing called chirality, okay? And there's all kinds of enzymes and molecules in our bodies that need this. And what this is, they're known as stereoisomers. And what they look like is mirrors of each other. So if you have a butterfly, it's like both wings, right? So you have this mirror image. And if one looks different than the other, because they need to be in a stereo pair, identical, then you're going to have problems. So essentially, it's like if you're flying on a plane, and you're the pilot, and one wing is heavier than the other. It doesn't look, you can't see it physically, but when you're flying and one wing's heavier, you're going to crash and burn. So this is what's happening here, because if you have a deuterium or deuteron replacing this hydrogen, then you won't have that symmetry anymore. And that's going to create all these problems downstream. And so the problems that it creates downstream is things start to unwind and look messy. You no longer have that coherence and integrity that is so vital to our life and health, longevity, and beauty. Again, here's the problem. This is a water molecule. This is what our bodies want. This is what we use. This is what we make. But when this or this gets replaced by a deuteron, and that's twice the size, that's the problem. So, when we're a copy of a copy of a copy, like I said. So if you look at our skin, which is a perfect reflection of what's happening on the inside, with age and exposure to toxins, sun, UV, there's damage. Deuterium does a lot of that damage. So, in the beginning, our skin looks like 5,000 thread Egyptian organic cotton. At the end, you look like a burlap bag. And the reason is because of that cross-linking of collagen. And that, like I said, if you want to really understand something, you go to the foundation, you go to the very source of that problem. And the very source of that problem, like I said, is this deuterium. In the triple helix, you no longer have that symmetry. And then that lack of that symmetry causes improper replication. Improper replication causes just a lot less of what you need in your body. Right? In this case, collagen and elastin. So that's why we look older as we age. That's why we have wrinkles and bad skin as we age. It's just a natural process that can be reduced by knowing this science and using it and reducing the deuterium in your body. So when you reduce deuterium in your body, here's a great study from China. They showed that it does the opposite. Look, it increased the collagen layer by quite a bit, actually. Quite a lot. And not, this is about 50 parts per million. We make 10 ppm. So, because of this and because of my passion for this and because of how much it's helped me and others, I put together a resource, basically all the studies and information that exists on deuterium, on deuterium-depletion.org. And so you won't find it on Wikipedia so much because we are censored because of that work of Gabor Shamlai talking about oncogenes. So they don't like that. So we know that 6+ decades of research, because of this deuterium problem, we start out as a rocket fuel dragster, and it's a slow crawl to the finish line. And this is the reason why. So the science of this is called deuteronomics, and it's emerging right now in biochemistry. And deuteronomics tells us, through all this 60+ years of research, that the ideal range of deuterium in the body is about 120 ppm. And most people are at 150. So the way you reduce deuterium in the body is by drinking deuterium-depleted water, fasting, being more keto. Remember this This picture from before, it showed you how deuterium occurs or is represented around the planet. Well, in some places you have less deuterium than others, and that has to do with the hydrological cycle. You could learn about it. It's pretty well known. But there's this anomaly in the Himalayas where you have water that's 125 parts per million of deuterium, which is very rare because most water in the world is 150. You also have Antarctica, which is 85 ppm, which is the lowest on the planet. 89 ppm. There's a little lake down in Antarctica that's 85, Lake Vostok. And the reason Antarctica has the lowest deuterium on the planet because it's water that's locked in time from about 80 million years ago. So around that time, the Earth had less deuterium, had a stronger magnetic field, slightly more oxygen, but Antarctica seems to be locked in time for its deuterium content. So when you have lower deuterium in these anomalous places, like in Mount Everest area, by the way, the reason you have that anomaly, believe it or not, is because a long time ago there was a meteor that landed there, landed there, and it was made up of water that had less deuterium on it. So anyway, when people climb Mount Everest, they need supplemental oxygen. It's just way too high for our metabolism to exist. So you have all these people that go to Mount Everest and they wear their oxygen because they would pass out and die without it. However, the Sherpas, the local people that live there, they don't need the oxygen. Not only do they go up to Mount Everest without oxygen, they're also going up there carrying your bags. Why? That's a good question. Why? And the reason is because not only did they grow up in a place that had deuterium-depleted water, but this is multi-generational. The original studies showed that when you have less deuterium in the water, these particular studies were done on mice and dogs, that you have a larger litter, faster to maturity, and all the benefits of like being an alpha, right? So these Sherpas that live in Mount Everest, they can summit without oxygen. In fact, a couple of Westerners have now done it because they, one, spent some time at base camp, so you can reduce your deuterium by drinking deuterium-depleted water over time, and two, they adopted a ketogenic diet, which is another way to deplete deuterium, just not as good as drinking deuterium-depleted water. So a lot of studies has been done. Unfortunately, we don't have much time, so I'm just going to briefly go over them. But this study basically showed that you create twice the amount of energy using the same amount of oxygen. So essentially half the amount of oxygen, you create the same amount of energy. So this is why in the Himalayas, those Sherpas that are deuterium depleted don't need supplemental oxygen. So it's quite profound because the name of the game is energy, as we all know. It's proton motive force. What is energy? What is energy in the physical? It's a movement of protons. So in this case, when you lower deuterium in your body, the oxygen that you breathe goes a lot further. So it's actually an intervention for increasing utilization of oxygen as well. In my research of deuterium over the last decade plus, I came across some interesting things. There was a gentleman that claimed to have contact with extraterrestrials. So he wrote in his book back in 1993, he said he spoke to one of these extraterrestrials, and he said that, I then asked why we of Earth age and die so rapidly relative to their lifespans. And they said they lived a very long time. They responded, aging on Earth is really a disease brought on by the fact that the water on Earth contains a toxic substance known as deuterium. So this has been coming into our awareness and consciousness over the last 60, 70 years. It was just overlooked. Why? Because nobody was making any deuterium-depleted water. Why? Because it's hard. Why is it hard? Because it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of industrial equipment, like you saw in that first picture. But we're doing it now. So another interesting one, I found the average beaver versus the pre-flood beaver. This is what Now, you're not going to get as big as that drinking deuterium-depleted water, but it's a good illustration. Also, something happened after the flood. If you believe it or not, it's not really important, but the historical and in the Bible, they say, these people that lived to 800, 900 years old, and they had this flood happen, and then everybody's lifespan just went down to 100 years. Well, what happened in the flood? Well, if there was a historical flood, that introduced a whole bunch of deuterium into the planet. And unfortunately, I don't have time to explain all the details of how and why. But I do want to plug an article that I wrote called Deuterium, the Elephant in the Space Capsule, because for human evolution and for our interest to get to the stars and to Mars, we're going to need deuterium-depleted water. And very few of these people that are in space really understand this. So I'm trying to get this awareness out there that when you go into outer space, you're going to be in an environment that is going to have more deuterium in it. When you go to Mars, and you start making water, you're going to find that has 5 to 6, 7 times more deuterium in it. So this is a problem that we're going to have to address. So if anybody's interested, everybody's interested in our future like that, then I encourage you to read this article. It's called Deuterium Elephant in the Space Capsule, because that's a major, major issue that we're going to encounter as we evolve. So how do we make deuterium-depleted water? Well, we simply just copy the hydrological cycle, and we just amp it up a little bit. We just intensify it a little bit in a closed space, in a giant column. And each column that we have makes just a little bit of deuterium-depleted water. So there's not a lot of it available. So this is something that we've been doing for almost 20 years. We started the company in the US in 2019, and then 10 plus years before that was a lot of lead up into creating the technology, from prototype stage all the way to commercial production. So what can you do? You can drink light water if you want to address this issue and this problem. And the way to drink light water is slowly over time, because one bottle is not going to do anything for you. The goal is to lower the body's deuterium. When you drink deuterium-depleted water through the mechanism of hydrogen exchange, you let go of some of that deuterium daily, about half a ppm to 1 ppm. So over time, 30 days, 45, 60 days, even 90 days. Generally, 90 days is what we recommend. You do deuterium-depleted water, half a liter or a liter per day, or more, it depends. And you do that for 90 days. And then you could actually test yourself before and after. I started a testing laboratory to test this contaminant in our bodies. And so you can test your saliva and you know what your deuterium level is. And some of the benefits you're going to receive from not the water, but from the state of being deuterium depleted. You're going to see metabolic detoxification. You're going to see rejuvenation effects. You're going to see a lot. You're basically your mitochondria doesn't expect to age backwards, but that's exactly what happens when you start drinking DDW. Or you could just say you age slower. So, like I said, the other way if you don't have any deuterium-depleted water, a keto diet will help, because if you run on fat, and if you burn fat, if you burn a kilo of fat, you produce almost a liter of metabolic water, which is deuterium depleted. Nature's strategy is to load the carbs up with deuterium and to deplete the fats. So that's why it's better to eat fat as a source of fuel, because less deuterium and produces more ATP. So again, if you want to keep your motor running, learn about the water that you're putting in your body. Get educated on how the water in your body functions. And I think I gave you a little bit of preview into that today. So hopefully this will encourage you to try some DDW. Again, don't do it unless you're going to do it for a considerable period of time. So this is why I believe light water is geroprotection perfected. we don't want to get here. We just want to stay here our whole lives. So as we age, we have more deuterium, and the goal is to get it out. So that's why I drink deuterium-depleted water, and that's why I started Litewater Scientific. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm going to take some. So you can use any water as a starting water because you have to completely strip it first. So, we learned it less than 100 years ago that we need to filter our water. So it started with distillation and reverse osmosis. But like I said, those remove contaminants from water. What we remove is a type of water from a water. So the first thing, you have to strip the water that you're starting with of everything. And then you put it in the column, and then you get the deuterium out. So it doesn't matter the source water. I mean, No, we actually, our water has no mineral. You can add mineral back into it, but it actually tastes really good just as it is. So we just want to provide the purest water on the planet. So to be able to say you have the purest water on the planet means it's pure H2O. There's no minerals in it. There's no deuterium is reduced down from 150 parts per million to 10 parts per million. And we even do 5 parts per million as well. So that's up to 97% lower. And over time, this will lower your deuterium level. Like, my deuterium level is somewhere between 100 and 110, which is it's like significantly lower than most people, And I have tons of energy. For a 52-year-old guy, it's kind of crazy how much energy I have. But it's deuterium. It's using this to improve this, That's what we're here for. Anybody else? Yes. Well, it's something that you kind of have to do nonstop, or at least periodically, because everything you do outside of lowering your deuterium is going to keep raising it back up. So some people do it for just long enough to get a metabolic benefit, to get their metabolism and their mitochondria back in order, and some people just do it nonstop. So just make that your source of water, or at least make that part of the water you consume, so the water that you get daily has less deuterium. Yes. Oh, yes. I think he cut me off. I can't go back. You saw those machines. You can't have it at home. I mean, you have to have a small power plant to even run the thing. Yeah, drinklitewater.com. That's what we do. We sell our water. Yeah, we make a small amount. What I don't drink, I sell. Yes, ma'am. So alkalinity and acidity is based on the minerals in the water. We don't have any minerals in our water, so our pH is perfect 7. Yeah, there's somebody back there. Yes, ma'am. Both. Oh, because we do everything ourselves. We blow our own molds. Yeah, we do I mean, if I'm going to drink out of plastic, I better have control of it from inception, and that's what we do. And also, plastic, it doesn't leach into water unless it's exposed to UV, big differences in temperature. So we make everything temperature controlled. Our bottles are dark blue. There's no light. I mean, so we try to do everything possible, but also at the same time offer it in glass. Usually it ships 2 to 3 days. We ship in the U.S., so you get it pretty quickly. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I've done some of that. Yeah. I've done some of that. Here, I don't have a slide on that one. I do have a slide, not here. What I will say though is most water is normal, meaning 150 ppm. If you want water, a bottled water that has less deuterium, glacial water will have that. Not Icelandic glacial, but because they're not real glacial, they just said they like the name, so they put it in there. But if you there's some glacial water from Canada, there's some glacial water from Mount Shasta, and those will tend to be in the lower 140, upper 130s. Now, interestingly enough, I was saying that you have different deuterium level all around the planet, and so in places that the further you are away from the hydrological cycle of the ocean, you're going to have lower deuterium and the higher elevation. So if you're drinking tap water from Boulder, Colorado, it's going to be 139 ppm versus 150. And over time, that's going to be an incredible biological benefit. So if you have twins and one twin lives in LA and the other in Boulder, see what happens in 10, 20 years when this one's drinking 150 ppm water and this one's drinking 139. So it's significant. Yes, sir. There is some good anecdotal. There's some good. People had report some interesting things on short-term use. It just doesn't make sense. But I can tell you some of those stories. They're quite profound. Even like I broke a 5-day dry fast, no food or water, with DDW one time. But again, I'm a pretty healthy guy. All the miraculous cases are people that were sick and got well. It's like I rarely hear somebody like, I'm healthy and I got healthier. Oh, big deal. But that's in fact what is in fact what does happen. I mean, we want to have practical health, right? So we're disease free, but we also want to have that on-demand health where you could just do anything in the moment that you need to do it. And that's what this will give you, because that's what it's given me and others. So you want that metabolic efficiency to be completely optimal. And when you lower the deuterium in your body to that 120 ppm range, you get in the optimal metabolic zone of your physiology. End of story. Yes? Yeah, you could come by the booth. I'll tell you about it. I just don't want to take everybody's time up with an explanation about that. Anybody else? Yes. The very first health benefit I got from this, because I trusted the science before I ever drank the water, so it was like a big risk. But then the science totally backed up the actual physical experience backed up the science. So that was the science proved me right, which was great. So the first thing that I experienced, and I've been pretty healthy for a while, was repair. So as I was looking, okay, how am I going to see this? Because yes, I see it working on people that have diseases and things like that, but how is it going to affect a healthy individual? And what I discovered was my ability to repair. So when I started drinking this in my late 40s, I noticed that my repair, meaning from injury, I started healing as fast as I did when I was a teenager. And that was very novel, because up until that point, it had my healing ability was decreasing. It would take longer to heal an injury. When I started doing DDW, my ability to heal an injury is just phenomenal. I mean, it's just, again, it's not me, it's the deuterium-depleted water, and it works if you use it to lower the deuterium in your own body. Any other questions? Yes, sir. We test saliva. Yeah, you could test breath vapor or saliva. We do. Yeah, we started a lab to test deuterium. It's deuteriumtest.com. Yes, ma'am. It's plastic or glass. Both, yeah. Both. I'm sorry, what? Oh, no. I mean, I think, I drink it out. I know I'm a person that likes to drink anything out of glass, but because I control the entire manufacturing process, I drink water out of plastic because there's no leaching into it. I mean, we test it. There's just nothing in there. There's nothing. Now, if you were to take that plastic, put it in a hot car, and then put it in the fridge and keep it in the sun, it might be different, but generally it's not a concern. Some people want the textual experience of drinking out of glass, where they just feel glass is better. So we provide it in glass as well. It's just a little extra step. It's just a little more expensive. So if the name of the game is lower your deuterium level, we're trying to do it in the most affordable way possible because it's already expensive. So that's why plastic seems to be the path of least resistance. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Yeah. Like I said to this gentleman, there are some amazing things that might happen like instantly, but generally it's a 90-day thing. Yeah, you just want to make sure that you, at the end of the day, you've put less deuterium into your body than you have, and that way you'll exchange some of it. Yes, or mixed. Generally, the reason we make 10 parts per million is because you can use that to dilute it with your regular water. Because light water is expensive per liter, so you can either drink it straight and then drink some other water during the day, or dilute it. So let's say if you dilute it with regular water, your regular drinking water, then you'll get 80 ppm. So you get 150, 10, you get an 80. So a lot of people just do that, mix half and half, and just make that all their water. Some people that can afford it drink it straight. Other people maybe 1 to 2, 1 to 3 still has benefit. If you take 1 part of deuterium depleted water, 10 ppm, and mix it with 3 parts of regular water, you're still going to get 120 ppm water, which is essentially where you want to be. Does that answer it? Yes. Volcanic? What do you mean? Oh, let's just test it. Send me a sample. We'll test it. It's not glacial water. It's just. Yeah. Well, the water is out. It's about all the water out there is about 150. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Again, you have to be away from the ocean far enough to have a little bit of reduction in deuterium, or just go on our website. Buy some water there. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Sure. You could also use it to make whatever you like making in the morning: coffee, tea, anything. What I like to do is, I was a big fan of coconut water, but coconut water is high in deuterium. So now I just get a evaporated coconut water powder, and I make my own deuterium depleted coconut water. So you could use it, morning, night, anytime. Again, the name of the game is just to lower the deuterium burden in our body, and that happens through an hydrogen exchange process daily, as long as what you drink has less deuterium than what you have in your extracellular fluid. No, because it's a natural contaminant. It's not generally not recognized as toxic. It's just time. Over time, it's just the toxicity it's like looking at a clock and trying to see the hour hand move. You only have to turn your head away and you go back. Oh my God, time's different. So it hurts us over time biologically as we age, and that's reflected in the mitochondria, because when you're 12 years old, that cell may have 10,000 mitochondria, and when you're 60 years old, that cell might have 90% less. So the mind is willing, but the body is weak because it doesn't have the factories to create the energy. So that's what we want to do. We want to keep that. So our water is a perfect neutral pH. So it's 7 So if you mix it with anything else, it's just going to take on the properties of whatever it's mixed with. Any more? Well, that concludes this talk. Thank you so much. Once again, my name is Victor Sagalovsky, Litewater Scientific. Our website, drinklightwater.com. Thank you.